The real estate agent's sign went up in our front yard while I was at my grandmother's grave. Marcus said it was time to move on, time for a fresh start, time to let go of the past. What he didn't say was that he'd already forged my signature on the preliminary documents. What he couldn't have known was that Walter Greene, our 72-year-old neighbor, had been watching everything from his workshop window, taking notes, and waiting for the right moment to tell me the truth. By the time Marcus realized his mistake, the house he tried to steal was the least of what he'd lost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I pulled into our driveway on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, my arms full of groceries and my mind still heavy from visiting Grandma Rose's gravesite. The anniversary of her passing always left me contemplative, grateful for the home she'd left me, this beautiful craftsman on Riverside Drive in Maplewood that held 3 generations of family memories. The afternoon sun filtered through the massive oak trees she'd planted as saplings 60 years ago, casting dappled shadows across the front porch where she used to shell peas every summer evening. That's when I saw it. A bright red and white sign stabbed into our front lawn like a knife. For sale, in bold letters, followed by Hanson Realty Group and a phone number I didn't recognize. My grocery bags slipped from my hands, oranges rolling across the driveway as I stood frozen, staring at this impossible thing that had appeared in my absence. The front door opened and Marcus appeared, his expression carefully neutral in that way I'd started recognizing over the past few months. The look that said he'd prepared an explanation, rehearsed his reasoning, anticipated my questions. He jogged down the porch steps with his hands in his pockets, that easy smile spreading across his face like we were about to discuss what to have for dinner rather than why our home was suddenly on the market without my knowledge. "Hey babe, I was going to call you," he started, reaching down to gather the scattered oranges. "I know this looks sudden, but I've been doing a lot of thinking. This house, it's just so much space for 2 people, and the maintenance costs keep climbing. Property taxes went up again. The roof needs work. That foundation crack the inspector mentioned last year is probably getting worse." I found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. "You put our house up for sale without talking to me first." "I'm talking to you now," he said, his tone shifting to that patient cadence he used when he thought I was being emotional rather than rational. "Look, I met with a real estate agent last week, just to get an assessment, and Claire, the market is incredible right now. We could make a substantial profit, buy something newer, smaller, easier to manage. Maybe one of those modern townhomes near the river. You've always said you wanted less yard work." That was true. I had said that once, during a particularly exhausting weekend of fall cleanup when my back ached and my hands were blistered from raking leaves. But I'd also said I loved this house more than any place on earth, that Grandma Rose's presence still lingered in every room, that I wanted our future children to grow up climbing the same oak trees I had climbed as a girl. "Take the sign down," I said quietly. Marcus set the oranges on the porch railing and turned to face me fully. "Claire, I need you to trust me on this. I've run all the numbers. This is the smart move financially. Hanson has buyers already interested, serious buyers who are pre-approved and ready to move quickly. We could close in 30 days. Something cold settled in my chest. 30 days? "Marcus, this is my grandmother's house. My house. My name is on the deed." "Our house," he corrected. "We're married. Community property. And yes, your name is on the deed, which is why I need you to sign the listing agreement." He pulled a folded sheaf of papers from his back pocket. "Hanson just needs your signature to make it official." I already signed my portion. I took the papers with numb fingers, scanning the dense legal text. My eyes snagged on a clause about exclusive representation, another about commission percentages, and then a section about seller disclosures. At the bottom of page 3, I saw Marcus's signature, bold and confident. Next to it, a blank line waited for mine, with my name typed underneath, Claire M. Donovan. Except there was something wrong. I flipped back to the first page, examining the property description more carefully. The address was correct, 847 Riverside Drive. The legal description matched our lot number and parcel identification. But the listed owners showed as Marcus J. Donovan and Claire M. Donovan, with a notation I didn't understand, some kind of code or reference number that seemed out of place. What is this number here? I pointed to the notation. Marcus glanced at it dismissively. Just internal paperwork tracking. Real estate agencies use those for their filing systems. Look, can we not get bogged down in administrative details? The important thing is the offer Hansen thinks she can get. We're talking about $750,000, maybe more if we get into a bidding war. That's almost $300,000 in profit from what the house was worth when your grandmother passed. $750,000. The number should have been exciting, should have represented security and possibility. Instead, it felt like a price tag on my history, on Grandma Rose's carefully tended garden, on the kitchen where she taught me to make her famous blackberry cobbler, on the bedroom where my mother was born, on the living room where I'd married Marcus just 3 years ago in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and the ghosts of family who'd filled these rooms with love. I'm not signing, I said, handing the papers back to him. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Claire, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You don't sell someone's family home without a real conversation, without mutual agreement, without considering what it means beyond the dollar amount. What it means, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a harder register I'd been hearing more frequently, is that we're house poor, stuck in a money pit that's eating our savings while we could be building wealth, investing in our future instead of throwing money at a structure that's falling apart around us. The house is not falling apart. The furnace is 20 years old. The water heater started making that noise last month. 3 of the windows don't seal properly anymore. The back deck has soft boards that need replacing. He ticked off each item like evidence in a prosecution. And that's just what we can see. Who knows what problems are hiding in the walls or under the floors? Every month we stay here is another month we're one emergency away from financial disaster. I wanted to argue, to point out that the furnace had been serviced regularly, that the water heater noise was just sediment buildup that could be flushed, that the deck boards were on my list to address in the spring. But something about Marcus's delivery felt rehearsed, like he'd been practicing this litany of complaints, building his case for why we needed to sell immediately. Bank statements to see if Marcus had received any unusual payments. His email and phone records, though accessing those felt like crossing a line I'd never imagined crossing in my marriage. Property records to understand exactly what rights I had as the inheritor of this house. There's something else you should know, Walter said, his tone shifting to something more delicate. That real estate agent, Veronica Hansen from Hansen Realty? She's been seen around town with Marcus quite a bit these past 2 months. Lunch meetings that run long, coffee dates that don't look entirely professional. The cold feeling in my chest expanded, pushing out the last warmth of denial I'd been clinging to. You think he's having an affair? I think Marcus has been making plans that don't include your best interests, Walter said carefully. Whether that includes personal entanglement with Ms. Hansen, I can't say for certain. But a man who hides business deals from his wife isn't usually hiding just one thing. After Walter left, promising to keep watching and to share anything else he noticed, I sat alone in my grandmother's kitchen and tried to process the destruction of my marriage happening in real time. 3 years ago, Marcus had stood in this very room and promised to honor and cherish me, to build a life together in this house we both claimed to love. He'd helped me sort through Grandma Rose's belongings after she passed, had held me while I cried over old photo albums, had assured me we'd never sell, that this house would be our children's inheritance just as it had been mine. Now he was conspiring to demolish it, to erase it from existence, to trade my family's history for whatever profit he could extract from developers who saw only dollar signs where I saw home. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Had to run to the office for a meeting. Back by 8. Please think about what I said. This is our chance for a better future. Our chance. Our future. Words that should have meant partnership and shared dreams but now sounded like manipulation and unilateral decisions dressed up as mutual benefit. I opened my laptop and began searching for answers, starting with the Maplewood City Planning Department website. Within minutes, I found what Walter had predicted. A preliminary inquiry filed 2 weeks ago by Chambers Development Group regarding feasibility of commercial zoning for properties at 847 and 851 Riverside Drive. My address and the vacant lot next door, listed together as a potential development site. The inquiry included a brief description of proposed use, something called a mixed-use professional complex, which in developer language meant ground floor retail with office space above. The kind of project that required demolishing existing structures, that would bring increased traffic and noise and parking problems, that would fundamentally change the character of our quiet residential street. Attached to the inquiry was a letter of property owner interest, signed by Derek Chambers. It referenced active negotiations with current property owners, and anticipated acquisition of both parcels within 60 days. 60 days. Marcus wanted to close in 30. My hands shook as I screenshot the documents and emailed them to myself. This wasn't a husband concerned about maintenance costs or investment strategy. This was a husband who'd made a deal, who'd promised developers he could deliver my property, who needed me to sign away my inheritance so he could collect whatever he stood to gain from the transaction. The betrayal felt physical, like I'd been punched in the stomach. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Every conversation over the past month suddenly took on new meaning. Marcus suggesting we should simplify our lives. Marcus pointing out every small problem with the house, every repair that needed attention. Marcus encouraging me to think about the future rather than dwelling in the past. He'd been softening me up, preparing the ground, laying the foundation for this moment when he would present the sale as inevitable, as the logical conclusion to a series of mounting problems he'd been systematically highlighting. I pulled out Walter's notebook and read through his observations more carefully. The dates he'd recorded matched other memories now clicking into place. The afternoon Marcus had said he was golfing with clients, he'd actually been meeting with Chambers in our driveway. The Saturday morning he claimed to be at the gym, the surveyor had been here mapping our property. The evening business dinner that ran until midnight, probably spent with Veronica Hansen discussing how to convince me to sign. My phone rang, an unknown local number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Donovan? This is Rita Sullivan from down the street. I hope I'm not overstepping, but I saw that sign go up today and I had to call. Rita's voice trembled slightly. Your grandmother was my dearest friend. She made me promise, if anything ever threatened this house, I should speak up. I think she knew something like this might happen. What do you mean? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. Rose didn't trust Marcus, Rita said bluntly. Oh, she was polite to his face, welcomed him into the family, but she told me in private she worried about his character. Said he had eyes that calculated value rather than appreciated beauty. She wanted to put the house in a trust, make it harder for anyone to sell without proper legal oversight, but she ran out of time. Tears burned behind my eyes. Grandma Rose had seen something I'd missed, some fundamental flaw in the man I'd married. She'd tried to protect me even from beyond the grave, had sensed this exact scenario unfolding. There's more, Rita continued. I'd been talking to the other neighbors, and several of us had been approached by this Chambers Development Group, asking if we'd consider selling. They're trying to assemble a larger parcel, want to buy up multiple properties on this block. The Chens across from you turned them down flat, but apparently Marcus told them you were eager to sell, that you'd been wanting to move for months. That's not true, I said quietly. We know, dear. That's why I'm calling. This neighborhood has been residential for over 80 years. If Chambers gets their way, if they build some commercial complex, it'll change everything. Property values might go up, but we'll lose the community, the quiet, the character that makes Riverside Drive special. Your grandmother fought against commercial development twice in her life. She'd want you to fight too. After Rita hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my kitchen and felt something shift inside me. The hurt and confusion began crystallizing into something harder, something more focused. Marcus had underestimated me, had assumed I was too sentimental and too trusting to see through his scheme. He'd counted on my grief and my love for him to make me pliable, easy to manipulate into giving up my inheritance. He was wrong. I opened Walter's notebook again and started my own list, documenting everything I knew and everything I needed to discover. Names, dates, documents, witnesses. I would build a case, gather evidence, understand the full scope of Marcus's betrayal before I confronted him. Because if I'd learned anything from Grandma Rose, it was that knowledge was power, that preparation mattered, and that family legacies were worth fighting for. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, almost like it was encouraging me, reminding me that these walls had sheltered strong women before me, women who didn't back down when challenged, who protected what mattered regardless of the cost. Marcus wanted to sell our home urgently. Now I needed to find out exactly why, and more importantly, I needed to stop him. I woke the next morning before dawn, Marcus's side of the bed already empty and cold. Through the bedroom window, I could see his car missing from the driveway. A note on his pillow read simply, "Early meeting. Back this afternoon. Think about the listing. Love you. Love you." 2 words that used to fill me with warmth now felt like strategic deployment, ammunition in whatever psychological warfare he was waging to separate me from my inheritance. I dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and pulled out my laptop at the kitchen table where Walter's notebook sat waiting. The city planning documents I'd found last night were just the beginning. If Marcus had made deals with developers, there would be a trail. Money changing hands, agreements drafted, communications that would reveal the full scope of his scheme. My first call went to Diane Hartwell, the real estate attorney who had handled Grandma Rose's estate transfer. Diane had worked with my grandmother for over 20 years, handling various property matters with the kind of meticulous attention that made her both expensive and worth every penny. When I explained what I'd discovered, her response was immediate and sharp. "Don't sign anything," she said. "And I mean nothing. Not the listing agreement, not any amendments Marcus might bring home, not even something that looks innocent like a power of attorney for property management. I'll be at your house in an hour." While I waited, I went through the house room by room with my phone, documenting everything. Video of the furnace that Marcus claimed was failing, running smoothly with the maintenance sticker from last month still bright and new. Photos of the water heater that supposedly needed replacing, the manufacturing date showing it was only 6 years old. Close-ups of the deck boards he'd said were rotting, which showed normal wear but nothing requiring immediate attention. Each piece of evidence contradicted the narrative Marcus had built about a crumbling money pit. The house had the usual minor issues of any 70-year-old structure, but nothing that justified urgent sale, nothing that constituted the emergency he'd manufactured. In Grandma Rose's bedroom, which I'd left largely unchanged since her passing, I found myself drawn to her old secretary desk by the window. She'd done all her correspondence here, paid bills, kept records. After she died, I'd sorted through most of the papers, but some drawers remained untouched, filled with items that had seemed too personal to examine in the immediate aftermath of grief. Now I opened those drawers with purpose. In the third one down, beneath a stack of old Christmas cards and newspaper clippings, I found a sealed envelope with my name written across it in Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter inside was dated 3 months before she died. "My dearest Claire," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope that means you had time to grieve properly before something made you search my desk. I'm writing this because I've lived long enough to recognize certain patterns in people, and I'm worried about Marcus." I sank into her desk chair, my heart pounding as I continued reading. "He's charming, I'll give him that. Knows how to say the right things, how to make himself indispensable. But I've watched how he looks at this house, and it's not the way someone looks at a home. It's the way someone appraises inventory. I've heard him on his phone sometimes when he thinks no one's listening, talking about property values and investment potential and exit strategies. Those aren't the words of a man who plans to stay." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing observations Grandma Rose had made over the 2 years Marcus and I were together before her death. His interest in the property boundaries. Questions he'd asked about zoning regulations and neighborhood development history. Conversations where he'd suggested the house was too large, too old, too expensive for a young couple. "I tried to protect you the best way I knew how," she wrote. "The house is yours alone, deeded only in your name. Community property laws might complicate things if Marcus pushes for sale, but the core ownership is clear. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. This house has been in our family for 3 generations because the women in this family fought to keep it. Your great-grandmother nearly lost it during the Depression but found a way to hold on. Your mother could have sold when your father died but chose to preserve it for you. Now it's your turn to fight, if fighting becomes necessary. The letter concluded with legal details I didn't fully understand, references to clauses in the deed and stipulations about inheritance that Grandma Rose had apparently built in as safeguards. She'd seen this coming, or something like it, and had tried to armor me against the exact situation I now faced. I was still sitting there, tears streaming down my face, when Diane arrived carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived several decades of legal battles. "Show me everything," she said without preamble. I spread it all out on the dining room table. The listing agreement Marcus wanted me to sign. The city planning documents showing Chambers Development Group's inquiry. Walter's notebook with dates and observations. The letter from Grandma Rose. Screenshots of the "for sale" sign that had appeared without my consent. Diane examined each item with the focused intensity of a surgeon, making notes in a small pad, occasionally taking photos with her phone. When she reached Grandma Rose's letter, she read it twice before looking up at me with something like admiration. "Rose was smarter than I gave her credit for," Diane said. "She didn't tell me about these additional protections. Look at this clause here." She pointed to a section of legal language in the letter. "Your grandmother included a reversion provision in the deed transfer. If you attempt to sell the property within 10 years of inheriting it, ownership reverts to a family trust she established, with you as beneficiary but not as controlling party. Essentially, she made it nearly impossible for you to sell quickly, even if you wanted to." "I don't understand." "The deed shows my name as sole owner." "You are the owner," Diane confirmed. "But your grandmother was clever. She filed the deed with the county but kept the reversion clause in a separate recorded document. It's legal and binding, but not immediately obvious unless someone does a thorough title search. Which I'm guessing Marcus didn't do." The implications slowly became clear. "So even if I signed that listing agreement, even if we found a buyer, the sale couldn't actually complete?" "Not without triggering the reversion clause, which would tie everything up in probate for months, possibly years. Any competent title company would catch it during the sale process." Diane smiled grimly. "Your grandmother essentially made the house unsellable for a decade, except under very specific circumstances that require extensive legal procedures and proof that sale is absolutely necessary." "What kind of circumstances?" "Extreme financial hardship, inability to maintain the property, condemnation by the city, things like that. And even then, the trust would have to approve, which means a panel of fiduciaries Rose appointed would need to agree the sale serves your best interests." Diane consulted her notes. "The trustees are myself, Walter Greene, and Rita Sullivan. 3 people who knew Rose well and who she trusted to protect you." Walter and Rita. My grandmother had literally built a fortress around this house using the people who cared about me, who understood what this place meant, who could be counted on to resist pressure or manipulation. "Does Marcus know about any of this?" I asked. "I doubt it. Rose set up the trust quietly, didn't make a big announcement. She probably figured if Marcus was genuine, he'd never need to know. But if he showed his true colors, you'd have protection." Diane closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. "Now we need to figure out what he's actually planning, because that listing agreement has some interesting language that suggests he knows more than he's telling you." She pulled out the paperwork Marcus had given me and pointed to the section I'd noticed yesterday. "This reference number here isn't from Hanson Realty's filing system. It's a transaction identifier from an escrow company. Which means there's already a purchase agreement in place, contingent on getting the property listed." My stomach dropped. "He already has a buyer. More than that. He has a contract. This isn't him testing the market or seeing what interest exists. He's promised to deliver this property to someone, and he's using the listing agreement to legitimize what's actually a predetermined sale." Diane's expression hardened. "Do you have access to his email or phone records?" We share a computer. I know his passwords. Then we need to look. I'll document everything properly so it can be used if necessary. But Claire, you need to understand what we're really dealing with here. This isn't just a husband who wants to move. This is fraud. Marcus is attempting to sell property he doesn't own using forged authorization. That's a criminal offense. The word criminal made everything suddenly more real and more frightening. My husband wasn't just being selfish or making bad decisions. He was breaking the law, and if Diane was right about the predetermined contract, he was doing it knowingly and deliberately. We spent the next 2 hours going through Marcus's email account on our shared desktop computer. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. A folder labeled RD Project, which I quickly realized stood for Riverside Drive, contained months of correspondence. The earliest emails dated back almost a year, long before Grandma Rose had even passed away. Messages between Marcus and Derek Chambers discussing future development opportunities and anticipated property availability. One email from Marcus, sent just 2 weeks after my grandmother's funeral, read, "Estate transfer complete. Property now in wife's name. Working on repositioning timeline to expedite potential sale. Working on repositioning timeline." He'd started planning this before I'd even finished grieving. The emails painted a clear picture of conspiracy. Marcus had approached Chambers' development group, not the other way around. He'd pitched the idea of combining my property with the vacant lot next door, had provided inside information about the neighborhood's resistance to commercial development, had positioned himself as someone who could deliver what developers wanted despite community opposition. In exchange, he stood to receive a finder's fee of $75,000, plus another $100,000 if he could secure agreement from 3 other property owners on the block. The total potential payout was over $250,000, money that would be separate from any profit on the actual home sale. "He's not just selling your house," Diane said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He's selling out your entire neighborhood." But the emails that made me physically ill were the ones between Marcus and Veronica Hansen. They'd started professionally enough, inquiries about listing procedures and market analysis. Then they'd shifted into something else entirely. Lunch meetings that devolved into flirtation. Late-night messages that had nothing to do with real estate. Photos exchanged that made their relationship unmistakably clear. One message from 3 weeks ago read, "Once we close this deal, we'll have enough for that place in Bend you liked. Fresh start for both of us, away from small-town complications." Fresh start. Away from complications. He meant away from me, away from the wife whose inheritance he planned to steal before discarding her entirely. "I need air," I said, standing abruptly and walking to the back door. In the garden Grandma Rose had tended for 50 years, I tried to process the magnitude of Marcus's betrayal. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a mistake made under pressure. This was calculated theft, months in the planning, executed with deliberate deception. He'd married me, moved into my home, presented himself as a loving husband, all while strategizing how to take everything and leave. Walter appeared at the fence separating our properties, a basket of late-season tomatoes in his hands. "Diane's car out front," he said simply. "Guessing you found some things." "He's been planning this since before Grandma Rose died," I told him, my voice surprisingly steady. "There's a contract with developers. He's getting paid to deliver my house and to convince other neighbors to sell. And he's having an affair with the real estate agent." Walter nodded slowly, unsurprised. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I looked back at the house, at the windows Grandma Rose had washed countless times, at the porch where 3 generations had watched summer storms roll in, at the roof that Marcus claimed was failing but that Walter had helped me inspect just 6 months ago and found perfectly sound. "I'm going to stop him," I said. "And then I'm going to make sure he faces consequences for every lie he's told." Walter's weathered face creased into something that might have been approval or might have been fierce satisfaction. Rose would be proud. She never could stand a man who thought he could get away with cheating. Back inside, Diane had organized the email evidence into categorized folders, each one documenting a different aspect of Marcus's scheme. Financial arrangements with Chambers. Communications with other property owners. Messages with Veronica Hansen. A timeline that showed premeditation and deliberate planning. I've already forwarded everything to my office server, Diane said. Encrypted and backed up. Even if Marcus deletes his email account, we have copies. Now we need to decide on strategy. Can we have him arrested? I asked. You said this was fraud. We can report it to the district attorney, yes. Attempted property fraud, forgery if he signed any documents claiming to represent your interests, possibly theft if he's received any money from Chambers already. Diane hesitated. But criminal prosecution takes time, and in the meanwhile, Marcus could do damage. Harass you, pressure you, potentially even become dangerous if he realizes he's cornered. What do you suggest? We go on the offensive legally but quietly. File for divorce immediately, with a detailed accounting of his fraudulent activities attached. Seek a restraining order based on financial exploitation. Notify Chambers Development Group that any agreements with Marcus are void and that further contact will result in legal action. Notify the Real Estate Commission that Hansen has engaged in unethical conduct. Diane ticked off each item on her fingers. All of this happens before Marcus knows what's coming. Then, when everything is in place, we confront him with the evidence and give him exactly one choice: walk away quietly with nothing, or face criminal charges plus civil suits that will follow him for years. The ruthlessness of it should have shocked me, but instead I felt only grim satisfaction. Marcus had been playing chess while I thought we were building a life together. Now it was time to show him I could play too, and that I'd learned from a master. Grandma Rose had taught me that strength came in many forms, and sometimes the strongest thing you could do was protect what mattered, no matter the cost. Do it, I said. All of it. Diane made calls while I continued searching the house for anything else Marcus might have hidden. In his office closet, behind old tax returns and forgotten sporting equipment, I found a locked metal box. The key was taped to the underside of the box itself, such a cliché I almost laughed. Inside were documents that completed the picture. A purchase agreement signed by Marcus on behalf of Donovan Family Trust, a trust that didn't exist. An earnest money deposit receipt showing Marcus had already accepted $25,000 from Chambers, money that should have gone into escrow but that the bank statement also in the box showed had been deposited into a personal account I didn't know existed. A draft contract for the sale of 3 additional Riverside Drive properties, with projected profits calculated in the margins. Most damning of all was a post-it note in Marcus's handwriting: see signs listing by Friday or move to contingency plan. V confirms alternative options. Contingency plan. Alternative options. What did that mean? I photographed everything, texted the images to Diane, and was returning the box to its hiding place when I heard the front door open. Claire? You home? Marcus's voice echoed through the house, hours earlier than expected. I shoved the box back into place and emerged from his office trying to look casual, my heart hammering against my ribs. In here. Thought you had meetings all day. He came down the hallway, loosening his tie, his expression tired but pleased. Wrapped up early. Good news, actually. Hansen has an offer already. Cash buyer, no contingencies, willing to close in 3 weeks. $775,000, which is even better than we expected. He pulled out his phone, showing me an official-looking email. All we need is your signature on the listing agreement and we can move forward. I stared at the email, at the numbers that represented Grandma Rose's lifetime of work and love converted into a transaction, and felt something crystallize inside me. This was the moment. I could confront him now, throw all the evidence in his face, watch him scramble to explain the unexplainable. Or I could play the long game Diane had outlined, let Marcus think he was winning while we built an unassailable case against him. That's a good offer, I heard myself say, buying time. Can I see the full proposal? Marcus's relief was palpable. Of course. I'll have Hansen send over everything tonight. I know this is hard for you, letting go of your grandmother's house, but Claire, this is our chance to start fresh. New place, new possibilities, building something that's ours instead of living in the past. Building something that's ours. The lies came so easily to him, delivered with such apparent sincerity. How many times had he practiced this speech, refined this manipulation, prepared to convince me that betrayal was actually opportunity? I need a few days to think about it, I said carefully. To really consider all the implications. Something flickered across Marcus's face, too quick to identify. Frustration? Concern? Then his understanding smile returned, the one that made him look reasonable and patient. Of course. Take the time you need. Just remember that in this market, good offers don't wait forever. The buyer could move on to other properties if we don't respond soon. Pressure disguised as consideration. Urgency presented as market reality. Every word chosen to manipulate me into acting against my own interests. After Marcus headed upstairs to change, I found Diane in the kitchen, listening to everything through the phone I'd left connected to her on an open call. Perfect, she whispered. He's confident, showing his hand. That email about the offer? I'll bet anything it's fabricated or that the buyer is actually Chambers using a shell company. Let him think he's winning. Meanwhile, I'll have divorce papers drawn up by tomorrow morning. That evening was surreal, sitting across from Marcus at dinner, watching him act the role of devoted husband while I knew the truth about every calculation behind his smile. He talked about the townhomes we should tour, about how freeing it would be to have less maintenance and more time for travel, about maybe starting a family once we were settled in our new place. A family. With me or with Veronica Hansen? The question burned in my throat, but I swallowed it down with my chicken and pasta, playing my own role now, the trusting wife considering her husband's sensible suggestions. My phone buzzed with a text from Rita Sullivan. Tom and Linda Chin want to meet tomorrow morning. The Braddocks too. Everyone Marcus approached about selling. They're ready to make a statement. The neighborhood was mobilizing, without Marcus having any idea. While he'd been scheming in private, the community my grandmother had spent decades building was closing ranks, preparing to defend against the threat he represented. After dinner, Marcus retreated to his office for a few work calls, which I knew from checking his email earlier were actually planning sessions with Chambers and Veronica about how to pressure me into signing. I used the time to meet with Walter in his workshop, where Diane had set up a temporary command center. The restraining order will be filed tomorrow afternoon, Diane explained, showing me the paperwork. Based on financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. The judge I'm submitting to has a strong track record on protecting spouses from economic abuse. I'm confident we'll get approval. What happens when Marcus finds out? I asked. He'll be served at his office by a process server. At the same time, you'll file for divorce with full disclosure of his fraudulent activities. Chambers Development will receive a cease and desist. Hansen Realty will get notification that their agent is under investigation. And I'll personally deliver a letter to the district attorney's office outlining potential criminal charges. Diane's smile was sharp. It'll be a very bad day for Marcus Donovan. Walter added, the neighbors are prepared to give statements about his solicitation attempts, about misrepresentations he made claiming you wanted to sell. Rita has been documenting everything, keeping records like your grandmother taught her. You've got an entire street full of witnesses to his character. The support should have made me feel stronger, but instead I felt the weight of what was coming. The end of my marriage, public revelation of how badly I'd been deceived, the legal battles that would follow. Even knowing Marcus deserved everything headed his way, I couldn't quite suppress the grief for what I'd thought we had, for the future I'd imagined that turned out to be built on lies. It's okay to be sad, Walter said gently, reading my expression. You can be angry about the betrayal and sad about the loss at the same time. Rose used to say that's what made you human, the ability to hold multiple truths together. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and focused on the task at hand. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and consequence. Tonight, I would gather my strength and prepare for the fight ahead. Grandma Rose had left me more than a house. She'd left me an example of resilience, a network of support, and the knowledge that some things were worth fighting for no matter how much it hurt. In my grandmother's bedroom that night, I pulled out the old quilt she'd made decades ago, each square a piece of fabric from important moments in our family's history. There was a patch from her wedding dress, another from my mother's baby blanket, a piece of my graduation gown. The quilt represented continuity, generations connected through care and craftsmanship. Marcus wanted to erase all of that, to tear down the physical structure that held these memories and replace it with something generic and profitable. He'd counted on me being too weak or too sentimental to stop him. He'd counted wrong. I fell asleep under that quilt, in that room, surrounded by the presence of strong women who'd come before me, and when I woke the next morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. The morning arrived with crystalline clarity, autumn's sunlight filtering through the oak trees and casting patterns across the hardwood floors Grandma Rose had maintained so carefully. Marcus was already awake, humming in the shower, completely unaware that today marked the beginning of his unraveling. I dressed deliberately, choosing one of the professional outfits I'd worn during my corporate days before Marcus had convinced me to work from home, back when I'd had colleagues and meetings and a life beyond these walls he was so eager to sell. Diane had texted at dawn with final confirmations. The process server was standing by at Marcus's office building. The divorce filing was queued for submission the moment I gave the word. The district attorney's office had reviewed the preliminary evidence and assigned an investigator. Everything was in position, waiting only for my signal. Marcus emerged from the bathroom, knotting his tie with practiced efficiency. "Big day ahead," he announced cheerfully. "I've got that presentation for the Riverside Development Consortium at 11. Should wrap up by early afternoon." He caught my expression in the mirror. "Everything okay? You look tense." The irony of him mentioning the Riverside Development Consortium, the very group he'd been secretly collaborating with to destroy our neighborhood, while asking if I was tense, would have been laughable if it weren't so grotesque. Instead, I manufactured a smile and said, "Just thinking about everything that needs to happen today." "Hanson is sending over the full purchase offer this morning," he continued, checking his phone. "Once you see the details, I think you'll feel better about moving forward. The buyer is even willing to let us rent back for 60 days if we need time to find a new place. Very accommodating." Accommodating. Because the buyer was actually Chambers Development using a shell company, and the rent-back provision was designed to keep us in the house long enough for Marcus to secure additional properties on the block before the real demolition plans became public. Every detail of his scheme was becoming clearer, each piece of false generosity actually calculated manipulation. After Marcus left for his office, I stood at the front window and watched his car disappear down Riverside Drive. Within minutes, Walter appeared at the back door with Tom Chen and Rita Sullivan, the first wave of neighborhood support Diane had orchestrated. "We've prepared statements," Tom said, settling at the kitchen table. His wife Linda had sent a written account of Marcus approaching them 6 times over the past 2 months, each time with increasing pressure to consider selling, each time using my supposed eagerness to move as justification. "He told us you'd been complaining about the maintenance burden, that you wanted something modern and manageable. We knew it wasn't true. Your grandmother raised you better than to abandon this place." Rita added her own documentation, a meticulous timeline that matched Walter's observations but added details I hadn't known. "Marcus has been meeting with representatives from Chambers Development at the coffee shop downtown, The Daily Grind. I volunteer there on weekday mornings, serving pastries. I've seen him 3 separate times with Derek Chambers and a woman I later learned was the lead architect for their projects. They had blueprints spread across the table, designs for what they wanted to build where our homes currently stand." She pulled printed photographs from her purse, candid shots taken with her phone showing Marcus hunched over architectural drawings, pointing at sections while Chambers and the architect made notes. The images were damning, irrefutable proof that Marcus wasn't just passively agreeing to a developer's offer but actively participating in planning the neighborhood's destruction. "How did you know to document all this?" I asked, overwhelmed by the level of detail my neighbors had gathered. Rita's smile was sad but knowing. "Your grandmother asked me to watch out for you after she was gone. She didn't say specifically what to watch for, but she had concerns about Marcus's intentions. So I've been paying attention, keeping records, making sure that if you ever needed proof of what he was really doing, you'd have it." The revelation that Grandma Rose had been so worried she'd enlisted Rita as a guardian made my throat tight. She'd seen through Marcus completely, had recognized the threat he posed, and had spent her final months building protections I was only now discovering. Diane arrived shortly after, carrying a briefcase and a determined expression. The process server is in position at Marcus's office building. I've coordinated with building security to ensure he can't be warned or slip out. When you're ready, I send the signal, and everything happens simultaneously. Divorce filing hits the court system, restraining order is processed, Marcus gets served, and notifications go out to Chambers and Hanson. I looked around my grandmother's kitchen at these people who'd rallied to support me, who'd spent weeks gathering evidence and building a case, who protected me when I hadn't even known I needed protection. Walter with his carpenter's hands and careful observations. Rita with her volunteer smile and covert photography. Tom and Linda Chen who'd refused lucrative offers because they understood community meant more than profit. Diane with her legal expertise and righteous anger on my behalf. Do it, I said. Diane made the call. Across town, wheels began turning that would dismantle Marcus's carefully constructed scheme. I imagined him in his office, probably reviewing his presentation for the development consortium, confident in his ability to deliver the properties he'd promised, completely blindsided by the process server who would hand him divorce papers and a restraining order that barred him from the house he'd been trying to sell. My phone rang within 20 minutes. Marcus's number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Again I declined. Then came a text, all capital letters, "What have you done? Call me now." Another text followed, "This is insane. We can work this out. Don't let lawyers manipulate you." Then, "Claire, please. I love you. This is a huge mistake." I turned off my phone and handed it to Diane, who would monitor communications and respond only through legal channels. Whatever Marcus wanted to say, whatever explanations or justifications he'd prepared, I didn't need to hear them. The evidence spoke clearly enough. Rita made tea while we waited, the kind of strong black tea Grandma Rose had favored, and we sat together in companionable silence. There was nothing more to do now except let the legal machinery work, let consequences unfold, let Marcus face the reality that his victim had discovered her own strength. Around noon, Diane's phone rang. She listened, asked several brief questions, then thanked whoever was calling and disconnected. Marcus left his office immediately after being served. Building security reports he was agitated, made several phone calls in the lobby, then drove off at high speed. I've notified local police that he may attempt to come to the house despite the restraining order. They'll have a patrol car nearby. The thought of Marcus desperate and possibly dangerous sent a chill through me, but Walter shook his head firmly. He's not getting near this house. I've got friends from the neighborhood watch positioned on the street. First sign of his car, we call police and document any violation. He's boxed in legally now, and anything he does will only make his situation worse. Tom Chen added, Linda is organizing a neighborhood meeting for tonight. Everyone on Riverside Drive who's been approached by Chambers or by Marcus. We're going to make a collective statement to the City Planning Commission opposing any commercial development on this block. Your grandmother started a neighborhood association decades ago specifically to fight these kinds of threats. We're reactivating it. The solidarity was overwhelming. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They were allies in preserving something Marcus had seen only as a commodity but that we understood as community, as history, as the irreplaceable accumulation of lives lived side by side across generations. Diane's phone buzzed with an email notification. Chambers Development's attorney just responded to our cease and desist. They claimed they had no knowledge that Marcus lacked authority to negotiate the property sale. They're demanding return of the $25,000 deposit they paid him. Will they get it? I asked. That'll be between them and Marcus. My concern is protecting you, and their acknowledgement that Marcus acted without authority helps establish the fraud claim. Diane made notes on her legal pad. The Real Estate Commission has also responded. They're opening an investigation into Veronica Hanson's conduct. If they find she knowingly participated in a fraudulent transaction, she could lose her license. The afternoon stretched long and strange. I found myself wandering through the house, seeing it with new appreciation now that I understood how close I'd come to losing it. The built-in bookshelves in the living room that Grandma Rose's husband had constructed, each shelf perfectly level despite the house's settling over decades. The window seat where I'd spent countless childhood hours reading while rain drummed on the roof. The back porch where 3 generations of women had snapped beans and shelled peas and shared the quiet work that built relationships stronger than words. Marcus had wanted to erase all of this, to reduce it to rubble and replace it with something sleek and profitable and utterly devoid of meaning. He'd looked at these walls and seen only obstacles to his enrichment, never understanding that some things had value beyond their market price. In Grandma Rose's bedroom, I opened the closet and pulled out the box where she'd kept her most precious possessions. Old photographs, my grandfather's war medals, my mother's baby book. At the bottom was a leather journal I'd never examined closely, assuming it was just household accounts or garden notes. Opening it, I discovered something else entirely. A record of the neighborhood's history, written in Grandma Rose's precise hand. Stories of families who'd lived on Riverside Drive, of children who'd grown up playing in these yards, of community efforts to preserve the residential character when previous developers had tried to commercialize the area. She'd documented 2 separate fights against rezoning proposals, both ultimately defeated through organized neighborhood opposition and appeals to the city council. The most recent entries, dated just weeks before her death, read like warnings. Claire doesn't see what Marcus truly wants. He asks too many questions about property values, about what the lot might be worth if developed differently. I've tried to protect her through legal means, but she'll need to be strong when the real test comes. The house will endure if she fights for it, but only if she understands that some people measure everything in dollars and never learn that home is something money can't buy. I sat on the floor of her closet, clutching the journal, and cried. Not from sadness anymore, but from gratitude for a grandmother who'd understood me well enough to know I'd need both protection and the space to find my own strength. She'd built legal barricades and recruited allies, but she'd also trusted me to eventually recognize the truth and take action. Diane found me there an hour later, red-eyed but resolute. The district attorney wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. They're considering criminal charges against Marcus for fraud and potentially for forgery if those documents he signed on behalf of a non-existent trust meet the legal threshold. Are you prepared for that? Will it go to trial? I asked. Possibly. Or Marcus might agree to a plea deal, especially given the strength of the evidence. Either way, this becomes public record. Your marriage, his betrayal, the whole situation will be documented in court filings that anyone can access. Diane's expression was sympathetic. I need to be honest about what you're facing. This won't be easy or private. Small towns talk, and this kind of scandal will be the topic of conversation for months. I thought about that. About walking through downtown Maplewood knowing people were discussing my failed marriage and my husband's crimes. About seeing former friends and wondering if they believed I'd been complicit or merely foolish. About the inevitable questions and the unavoidable gossip. Then I thought about Marcus getting away with it. About him moving on to the next scheme, the next victim, the next opportunity to exploit someone's trust for personal gain. About other families potentially losing their homes because I'd been too embarrassed or too private to stop him publicly. File everything, I said. Criminal charges, civil suits, whatever makes sure he faces real consequences. I don't care about the gossip. That evening, the neighborhood meeting Rita had organized filled the community center 3 blocks from Riverside Drive. Over 40 people attended, representing every household on our street and several from adjacent blocks. Tom Chen had prepared a presentation showing the scope of Chambers Development's plans, using the blueprints Rita had photographed and additional documents obtained through public records requests. The designs were worse than I'd imagined. A 4-story mixed-use building spanning what would have been 5 residential lots, including mine. Ground floor retail, 3 floors of medical and professional offices above, with a parking structure behind that would eliminate the mature trees shading our backyards. The architectural renderings showed something sterile and corporate, completely out of character with the neighborhood's craftsman homes and tree-lined streets. This is what Marcus Donovan tried to deliver to developers, Tom announced, his usually gentle voice hard with anger. He approached at least 8 families on this block, misrepresenting his wife's wishes, offering to facilitate sales, positioning himself as a helpful neighbor while actually working for outside interests who wanted to destroy our community. The room erupted in conversation. Some people I recognized from years of waving across yards and exchanging pleasantries at the grocery store. Others were newer residents I'd never formally met but who clearly cared deeply about preserving the neighborhood's character. One elderly man I didn't know stood and addressed the crowd. "I'm Frank Morrison, lived 2 streets over for 43 years. Rose Donovan helped me fight commercial rezoning back in 1995 when a different developer wanted to put in a strip mall. She organized petition drives, spoke at council meetings, rallied neighbors who'd never been politically active. We won because Rose understood that community isn't just houses near each other, it's people committed to protecting each other's quality of life." He looked directly at me. "Your grandmother would be proud of what you're doing, standing up to this threat just like she taught you." His words, offered by a stranger who'd known Grandma Rose in contexts I'd never witnessed, reinforced that she'd been more than my beloved relative. She'd been a neighborhood institution, a defender of the community's character, someone people turned to when development pressures threatened their homes. I was inheriting more than her house. I was inheriting her legacy of resistance. Rita presented the formal opposition we prepared for the City Planning Commission. It documented the neighborhood's residential history, cited zoning regulations that prioritized maintaining community character, included statements from current residents opposing commercial development, and detailed Marcus's fraudulent attempts to circumvent normal procedures through deception and manipulation. "We're filing this tomorrow with the planning office," Rita announced. "And we're requesting a public hearing where residents can formally object to any rezoning proposals. Chambers Development may try to move forward, but they'll find this neighborhood isn't the easy target they assumed." After the meeting, dozens of people approached me with support, offering testimony for any legal proceedings, volunteering to help with my case however they could. Mrs. Bradford, who'd lived next to the vacant Hoffman lot for 20 years, handed me a folder of photographs showing Marcus meeting with surveyors and developers on that property without authorization from the Hoffman estate. "The Hoffman children are fighting over what to do with their father's house," she explained. "They certainly haven't authorized any development planning. Marcus has been treating that lot like he already controls it, showing it to developers, including it in his proposals. The Hoffman family attorney might be interested in knowing about his unauthorized activities." Another piece of evidence, another thread to pull that would unravel more of Marcus's schemes. How many people had he deceived or attempted to deceive? How many properties had he tried to deliver to developers despite having no legitimate authority? Walking home in the darkness, Walter beside me carrying leftover cookies someone had brought to the meeting, I felt the weight of what I'd set in motion. There would be legal battles ahead, testimony and depositions and court appearances. There would be financial complications as Marcus and I disentangled our lives. There would be the emotional aftermath of a marriage revealed as hollow. But there would also be this, a neighborhood that had rallied around me, a house I'd saved from destruction, a community preserved against commercial exploitation, and the knowledge that I'd honored my grandmother's legacy by fighting for what mattered. "You did good today," Walter said as we reached my front walk. The patrol car Diane had requested sat at the curb, its presence a reminder that Marcus's desperation might make him unpredictable. Rose would have handled it exactly the same way. Gather the facts, build the case, strike decisively. Inside, the house felt different somehow. Still familiar, still filled with memories and meaning, but also renewed with purpose. This wasn't just a structure to be maintained. It was worth defending, worth fighting for, worth the complications and consequences that defense required. I made myself dinner in Grandma Rose's kitchen, using her cast iron skillet and her favorite wooden spoon. Simple comfort food, nothing fancy, but satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with taste and everything to do with continuity. 3 generations of women had cooked at this stove, and I was ensuring there would be more generations to come. My phone, which Diane had returned after screening it for relevant messages, buzzed with a voicemail notification. Marcus had called 7 more times, leaving increasingly agitated messages that Diane had listened to and logged as evidence. The final one simply said, "You're making a terrible mistake. I gave you a chance to do this the easy way." The implicit threat wasn't lost on me or on Diane, who'd already forwarded that message to the district attorney's office as potential witness intimidation. Every action Marcus took in his panic was strengthening the case against him, providing additional documentation of his character and his intentions. Before bed, I checked all the locks on the doors and windows, conscious of the patrol car outside but taking no chances. The restraining order legally prohibited Marcus from coming within 500 feet of the house, but desperate people didn't always respect legal boundaries. I kept my phone charged and nearby, with Diane's number and the local police both on speed dial. Sleep came fitfully, my dreams filled with fragments of confrontation and resolution. I woke several times, listening to the house settle around me, the familiar creaks and sighs that had been the soundtrack of my childhood. Each time, I reminded myself that this structure was still mine, still standing, still protected. Morning brought news from Diane that the district attorney's office had moved quickly. They'd issued a warrant for Marcus's financial records and were coordinating with the bank that held his secret account. Chambers Development had formally withdrawn their development proposal, citing misrepresentation by a non-authorized agent and distancing themselves from Marcus as rapidly as possible. The Real Estate Commission had suspended Veronica Hansen pending investigation, effectively ending her career in Maplewood. The web Marcus had woven was collapsing, taking down anyone who'd been complicit in his schemes. And at the center of that collapse was the house he'd tried to steal, still standing, still mine, still home. Walter appeared at my back door with fresh coffee and warm cinnamon rolls from the bakery downtown. "Figured you might not feel much like cooking this morning," he said. "And I wanted to show you something." He led me to his workshop, where he'd been working on a project I hadn't known about. A carved wooden sign, beautifully crafted with letters burned into the wood and sealed with protective varnish. It read, "The Rose Donovan House, EST 1948, protected 2024. Thought it was time your grandmother got proper recognition," Walter explained. "And that the house got designated with her name, so anyone looking at property records or driving past knows this place has history worth preserving. I've contacted the county about getting it officially registered as a heritage property, which would add another layer of protection against demolition." The gesture, so thoughtful and so perfectly timed, made my eyes sting with tears. "She'd love this, Walter." "Thank you." "She earned it." "And so did you," standing up when it would have been easier to just sign the papers and walk away. He handed me the sign. "Where should we hang it?" Together, we mounted it beside the front door, replacing the generic house number with something that proclaimed this building's significance. As we stepped back to admire the work, Rita emerged from her house across the street, followed by Tom and Linda Chin. Word had spread somehow that we were installing the sign, and neighbors had come to witness and celebrate. Someone produced a camera. Photographs were taken of the sign, of the house, of me standing on the porch where Grandma Rose had stood for so many years. The images would document this moment of preservation, this victory of community over commercial exploitation, this instance when enough became enough and ordinary people pushed back against schemes designed to profit from their displacement. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously, aware that Marcus might try to contact me through other means. "Mrs. Donovan? This is Detective Sarah Walsh from the District Attorney's Economic Crimes Unit. I'd like to schedule a formal interview for this afternoon if possible. We've uncovered some additional information about your husband's activities that we need to discuss." Additional information. What else had Marcus done that I didn't know about? How deep did his deception run? "I can be there at 2, I said. "Perfect. And Mrs. Donovan? You should know that we're treating this as a serious case. The evidence you and your attorney have provided shows a pattern of fraud that extends beyond just the attempted property sale. Your cooperation is going to be crucial in making sure justice is served." After the call ended, I stood in my grandmother's house and thought about justice. Not revenge, which was hot and immediate and ultimately empty. Justice, which was colder and more methodical and infinitely more satisfying. Marcus would face consequences not because I was vindictive, but because actions carried weight and wrongs demanded correction. Diane arrived to accompany me to the meeting with Detective Walsh, bringing a file box full of additional documentation she'd continued compiling. Bank statements showing transfers I hadn't authorized. Credit card charges for expensive dinners and hotel rooms during times Marcus had claimed to be traveling for work. Phone records showing hundreds of calls to Veronica Hansen over the past 6 months. The detective is going to be thorough, Diane warned. She'll ask difficult questions about your marriage, about your finances, about whether you suspected or should have suspected what was happening. Some of it will feel accusatory even though she's on your side. Try to stay focused on facts rather than emotions. The district attorney's office occupied a stolid brick building downtown, the kind of institutional architecture designed to convey seriousness and permanence. Detective Walsh met us in a conference room, a woman in her 40s with short graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. She thanked me for coming, asked if I wanted water or coffee, then dove directly into questions. How long had I been married to Marcus? When had I inherited the house? Had I been aware of his meeting with developers? Did I know about the secret bank account? Had he ever forged my signature on other documents? Did I have access to his financial records? I answered each question as honestly as I could, acknowledging when I'd been naive or trusting, admitting when I should have questioned things I'd accepted at face value. Detective Walsh took meticulous notes, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting documentation Diane provided from her boxes. After an hour, she leaned back in her chair and studied me with something that might have been respect. Mrs. Donovan, I've been investigating financial crimes for 12 years. I've seen a lot of victims who were complicit in their own victimization, who ignored red flags because acknowledging them would have been inconvenient. That's not what happened here. You were systematically deceived by someone who exploited your trust and your grief to position himself for theft. What happens now? I asked. We're building a case for multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and potentially theft. Your husband accepted money from developers under false pretenses. He signed documents claiming to represent a trust that doesn't exist. He attempted to sell property he had no legal right to convey. Any one of those would be serious. Altogether, we're looking at potential felony charges. The word felony hung in the air between us. Marcus wouldn't just lose his schemes. He'd potentially lose his freedom, his reputation, his future. The magnitude of the consequences he'd brought on himself was staggering. Will I have to testify? I asked. Almost certainly, if it goes to trial. But Mrs. Donovan, with the evidence we have, I suspect your husband's attorney will strongly encourage a plea deal. No competent lawyer would take this to a jury. The documentation is too extensive, the deception too clear. More likely, we'll negotiate terms that include restitution, probation, and an agreement not to contest the divorce or attempt any claim on your property. That was the outcome Diane had predicted, the practical resolution to a situation that could otherwise drag through courts for years. Not emotionally satisfying perhaps, but legally sound and ultimately protective of my interests. When we emerged from the district attorney's office, afternoon sunlight slanted across the small downtown park across the street. Diane suggested we walk for a few minutes before driving back, give me time to process everything before returning to the house that had been the center of all this conflict. We sat on a bench beneath a maple tree blazing with autumn color, and I thought about cycles and seasons and the way things ended so new things could begin. My marriage was over, revealed as fraudulent from the start. That hurt, that sense of wasted years and misplaced trust. But the ending was also liberation, freedom from a relationship that had been slowly strangling my independence and my connection to what mattered most. How are you really doing? Diane asked, her professional demeanor relaxing into something more personal. I'm okay, I said, surprised to find it true. Angry still, and sad about what I thought we had. But also relieved. Like I can finally breathe again without measuring every action against what Marcus might think or want. That's grief and relief coexisting, Diane observed. Perfectly normal when you're escaping something that was harmful even if you didn't fully recognize the harm at the time. We sat in companionable silence, watching people move through their ordinary afternoons, completely unaware of the small legal drama that had played out in the building behind us. Their lives continued without interruption while mine was being fundamentally restructured, and there was something comforting about that contrast. The world was large enough to contain both crisis and normalcy, both ending and beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from Rita, Neighborhood Association officially reactivated. First meeting next week to discuss long-term preservation strategies. Rose would be proud. Rose would be proud. Those words, offered by multiple people over the past days, carried weight I was only beginning to understand. My grandmother had lived her values, had fought for her community, had protected what she loved. Now I was doing the same, carrying forward her example in ways she'd anticipated and prepared for. As Diane and I drove back to Riverside Drive, I looked at the familiar streets with new appreciation. This town, this neighborhood, these people, they weren't just backdrop to my life. They were the substance of it, the connections that gave meaning to the physical space of home. Marcus had seen only real estate value. I saw community, history, continuity, the irreplaceable accumulation of relationships and shared experience. The house waited, my grandmother's sign now mounted proudly beside the door. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings and more complications. But today, this moment, I could simply be grateful that some things had been preserved, that some fights had been won, that some homes remained standing against those who would destroy them for profit. The following week passed in a blur of legal appointments and neighborhood meetings, each day bringing new revelations about the scope of Marcus's deception. Detective Walsh called regularly with updates, each conversation revealing another layer of fraud I hadn't known existed. He'd taken out a second mortgage on a rental property his mother owned, forging her signature on the loan documents. He'd emptied a small investment account my father had left me, one I'd forgotten about in the chaos of grief when Dad passed 5 years ago. He'd opened credit cards in my name, running up balances I'd never seen. The financial devastation was worse than I'd initially understood. Marcus hadn't just tried to steal my house. He'd been systematically draining every resource he could access, building a nest egg for his planned escape with Veronica Hansen while leaving me buried in debt I hadn't incurred. Diane filed additional motions to hold Marcus responsible for the fraudulent debts, to freeze any remaining assets until proper accounting could be completed, to ensure he couldn't hide money or transfer property before the legal system caught up with him. Each filing felt like another brick in the wall of consequences being built around a man I'd once believed I knew. But amid the legal proceedings and financial reckonings, something unexpected was developing. The house itself seemed to be revealing its secrets, as if Grandma Rose's presence was guiding me toward discoveries she'd hidden away for exactly this moment. I was sorting through boxes in the attic one afternoon, looking for old financial records Diane had requested, when I found a metal lockbox I didn't recognize. Unlike the obvious safe in Marcus's office, this box was hidden inside a larger trunk of vintage clothing, wrapped in an old quilt and tucked beneath moth-eaten winter coats. The key was attached with twine to a tag that read, "For Claire, when she needs it most." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were bundles of letters, each tied with ribbon and organized by date. The first bundle was labeled "Before," and contained correspondence between Grandma Rose and her attorney Diane, discussing concerns about Marcus that dated back to shortly after our engagement. He asked very specific questions about the house's value today, one letter read. Wanted to know exact square footage, current market comparables, what I thought it might sell for. Not the questions of someone planning to live here, but of someone assessing inventory. Another letter, dated 2 months before our wedding, I've hired a private investigator to look into Marcus's background. I hope I'm wrong, but something about his eagerness to marry so quickly, his insistence on a small private ceremony, his vagueness about his own family, all of it raises concerns. The investigator's report was in the next bundle, labeled Truth. I read it with growing horror and a strange sense of vindication. Marcus Donovan wasn't who he'd claimed to be. His real name was Marcus Holloway, and he'd been married twice before, both marriages ending when he'd attempted to defraud his wives out of inherited property. The first wife had owned a farm in eastern Oregon that Marcus had tried to sell to developers. The second had inherited a commercial building in Portland that Marcus had attempted to mortgage without her knowledge. Both times, he'd escaped serious consequences by settling quietly, paying back a portion of what he'd stolen and moving on to the next opportunity. By the time he'd met me, he'd refined his approach. A charming courtship, quick marriage, strategic positioning within the target's life, then the elaborate scheme to acquire property he had no legitimate claim to. The pattern is clear, the investigator's summary concluded. Marcus Holloway is a sophisticated con artist who specializes in marriage fraud. He identifies women with valuable property, particularly those who are vulnerable due to recent loss or isolation, and inserts himself into their lives with the goal of stealing their assets. Recommend extreme caution. Grandma Rose had known. She discovered the truth about Marcus before our wedding but had chosen not to confront me directly, perhaps knowing I was too in love to listen, too convinced I'd found a partner who truly cared. Instead, she'd done what she could to protect me through legal structures and hidden documentation, preparing for the day when I'd be ready to see the truth. The final bundle was labeled "After," and contained letters Grandma Rose had written but never sent, addressed to me. Reading them was like hearing her voice again, like she was sitting beside me in the dusty attic light, speaking the words she hadn't been able to say before she died. My dearest Claire, the first letter began. If you're reading this, then Marcus has shown his true nature, and you've been strong enough to stand against him. I'm proud of you, though I wish circumstances hadn't required such strength. I couldn't tell you what I knew while I was alive. You were so happy, so certain you'd found love, and I couldn't bring myself to shatter that illusion without proof that would convince you. So instead, I built walls around what mattered most. The house is protected through mechanisms Marcus doesn't understand. The community is alert to the threat he represents. And you, my darling girl, you have everything you need to survive this and emerge stronger. She went on to describe her own experience with betrayal, a business partner who'd tried to cheat her out of property decades ago, before I was born. I learned then that some people see relationships only as transactions, as means to an end. They're excellent actors, these people. They say what you want to hear, mirror your values, pretend to share your dreams. But underneath, they're always calculating, always looking for the angle that benefits them most. It's not personal, their betrayal. You could have been anyone with something they wanted. That knowledge doesn't make it hurt less, but it does make it clearer. You weren't foolish to trust. Marcus was skilled at deception. There's a difference. The letter concluded with advice that felt simultaneously practical and profound. Take time to grieve, but don't let grief become paralysis. Use your anger, but don't let anger consume you. Fight for what matters, but remember that winning sometimes means simply surviving with your integrity intact. The house will stand long after this crisis passes. Make sure you're still standing too. I sat in the attic for a long time after reading those letters, letting tears flow freely, allowing myself to fully feel the weight of deception and the gift of my grandmother's foresight. She'd known I would face this. She'd prepared me for it as best she could. And now, holding evidence of Marcus's serial fraud, I had the final piece needed to ensure he faced real consequences. Diane's reaction when I brought her the investigator's report was immediate and fierce. This changes everything. He's not just a con artist, he's a repeat offender. The district attorney can use this pattern to argue for harsher charges and sentencing. His previous victims might be willing to testify, establish the systematic nature of his crimes. Within days, Detective Walsh had tracked down both of Marcus's ex-wives. Sarah Holloway, the first wife, lived in a small town near the Idaho border, running the family farm Marcus had tried to steal. She was initially reluctant to discuss the marriage, old wounds that hadn't fully healed, but when she learned Marcus had attempted the same scheme with me, her reluctance turned to determination. I blamed myself for years, Sarah told me during a phone call Diane arranged. Thought I should have seen through him sooner, should have been smarter about protecting what was mine. My therapist helped me understand that blaming the victim is exactly what predators count on. They want us to feel stupid for trusting them, to be too embarrassed to report what happened. Well, I'm done being embarrassed. If my testimony helps put him away, I'll testify. Jennifer Chen, the second wife, was more immediately willing to cooperate. She'd spent the past 3 years rebuilding her finances after Marcus's theft had nearly bankrupted her. He took everything that wasn't nailed down, she said bitterly. Not just the building, but savings, investments, even my grandmother's jewelry he claimed to have insured but actually pawned. I settled because my attorney said prosecution would be lengthy and expensive. But if someone else is paying for the trial, if there's a real chance of him facing consequences, absolutely I'll testify. The case against Marcus was becoming ironclad. 3 victims, a clear pattern of behavior, extensive documentation, financial crimes spanning multiple states. Detective Walsh estimated that if convicted on all counts, Marcus could face between 8 and 12 years in prison, with restitution requirements that would leave him financially ruined for decades. But building the legal case was only part of what needed to happen. The deeper work was internal, the process of understanding how I'd been deceived and ensuring I didn't carry unearned shame about that deception. Rita recommended a therapist she knew, someone who specialized in helping victims of financial and emotional manipulation. Dr. Angela Morrison had kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach that cut through self-blame and focused on recognizing patterns of predatory behavior. Con artists are successful because they're skilled, Dr. Morrison explained during our first session. They study their targets, identify vulnerabilities, craft personas designed to appeal to specific needs. You weren't foolish for believing Marcus loved you. He was deliberately presenting a false self that was carefully calculated to earn your trust. That's not a failure on your part. That's exploitation. The sessions helped me separate what had been real from what had been performance. The early courtship that had felt so romantic, Marcus showing up with my favorite coffee without me having to ask, was actually surveillance, him noting my preferences to better mirror them. The way he'd seemed to share my values about family and community was strategic agreement, saying what I wanted to hear while planning the opposite. Even the small gestures of affection, the notes and gifts and tender moments, were investments in a long-term con. Understanding the mechanics of manipulation didn't eliminate the pain, but it did reduce the shame. I hadn't been uniquely gullible or willfully blind. I'd been targeted by someone who'd refined his approach over years and multiple victims. The responsibility was his, not mine. Walter became an unexpected source of healing during this period. He'd lost his wife 15 years earlier and understood grief's complicated nature. We fell into a routine of morning coffee in his workshop, where I'd help with whatever furniture restoration project he was working on while we talked about everything and nothing. Betrayal is just another kind of loss, Walter observed one morning while showing me how to properly strip old varnish from a chest of drawers. You're mourning the relationship you thought you had, the future you believed you were building. That mourning is legitimate even though the relationship was false. The dreams were real, even if the person wasn't. His workshop became a sanctuary, a place where I could work with my hands and let my mind process everything that had happened. The methodical nature of restoration work, stripping away layers to reveal what was underneath, felt metaphorically appropriate. I was stripping away the false narrative of my marriage to reveal the truth beneath, painful as that truth might be. The neighborhood rallied around me in ways both practical and profound. Tom and Linda Chen brought dinner twice a week, refusing to let me decline their generosity. Rita organized a rotation of neighbors who stopped by regularly, ensuring I was never alone unless I wanted to be. Mrs. Bradford from down the street, who I'd barely known before all this began, brought over boxes of her late husband's legal textbooks, thinking they might help me understand the proceedings. The attention could have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt like being held, like the community itself was creating a safety net to catch me during the fall. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They were chosen family, people united by shared values and mutual protection. The first neighborhood association meeting in 20 years filled Rita's living room to capacity. 42 people crowded into a space designed for maybe 20, sitting on folding chairs and floor cushions, united in their determination to prevent commercial development on Riverside Drive. Tom Chen presented the comprehensive opposition package we prepared for the City Planning Commission. It included historical documentation of the neighborhood's residential character, environmental impact concerns about increased traffic and lost green space, testimonials from residents about community cohesion, and legal arguments about the impropriety of rezoning based on fraudulent property acquisition attempts. Chambers development may try to move forward, Tom acknowledged. But they'll face organized resistance at every step. Public hearings where we all testify. Media coverage of their attempted use of fraud to acquire property. Scrutiny from city officials who don't want to appear complicit in schemes that harm existing residents. We're going to make this so difficult and so public that any developer will think twice before targeting our neighborhood. The energy in that room was electric. People who'd lived side by side for years without much interaction beyond casual greetings were now collaborating on strategy, volunteering for action committees, pledging financial support for legal challenges. Marcus's attempted theft had inadvertently strengthened the very community he'd tried to help destroy. During the question period, Frank Morrison, the elderly man who'd known Grandma Rose from previous development fights, stood to speak. "I want the younger folks here to understand something. This isn't our first battle, and it probably won't be our last. Developers will always be attracted to desirable residential areas, always looking for ways to maximize profit by changing zoning and building what residents don't want. The only way to protect our neighborhood long-term is to stay organized, stay vigilant, and maintain the structures Rose Donovan helped build decades ago." He turned to look at me directly. Claire's fight wasn't just about her house. It was about all of us, about preserving the neighborhood her grandmother dedicated years to protecting. By standing up to her husband's fraud, she reminded us why that protection matters and what we risk if we get complacent. We owe her more than support. We owe her continuation of the work Rose started. The applause that followed was unexpected and overwhelming. I hadn't been seeking recognition or praise. I'd been trying to save my home and expose betrayal. But Frank was right that the personal and communal were intertwined. My individual fight had become symbolic of larger questions about community values and resistance to exploitation. After the meeting, as people lingered over coffee and homemade cookies, I found myself in conversations that went beyond the immediate crisis. Plans for a neighborhood history project to document Riverside Drive's past. Ideas for regular social events to strengthen connections between residents. Discussions about forming a land trust that could eventually purchase and preserve properties when owners wanted to sell, keeping them residential and preventing commercial development. The vision emerging was of a community that didn't just react to threats but proactively built structures to resist them. Grandma Rose would have loved it, this evolution from her individual efforts into collective action. Walking home that night, the street lights casting pools of amber across familiar sidewalks, I felt something shift internally. The anger that had fueled me through the initial discovery and legal actions was beginning to transform into something more sustainable. Not forgiveness for Marcus, who deserved none, but release of the emotional weight he'd represented. He'd tried to take my home and my security. Instead, he'd inadvertently given me clarity, community, and a deeper appreciation for what truly mattered. The house welcomed me with its customary creaks and sighs, sounds I'd grown up with and that now felt like a language only I could fully understand. In the kitchen, I made tea using Grandma Rose's favorite mug and sat at the table where 3 generations of women had made decisions, paid bills, planned futures, and endured hardships. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a sunflower, was the quote Grandma Rose had written on an index card years ago: "A house is made of walls and beams. A home is made of love and dreams." Marcus had understood walls and beams, had calculated their market value and potential for exploitation. He'd never understood love and dreams, the intangible elements that made this place irreplaceable. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. DA's office reached out to Marcus's attorney. They're proposing a plea deal. Full restitution, guilty plea to felony fraud, 5 years probation with the possibility of reduced prison time if he cooperates fully. His lawyer is advising him to take it. They want your input before finalizing terms. 5 years probation instead of 8 to 12 years in prison. Part of me wanted to insist on maximum punishment, wanted Marcus to serve every possible day behind bars. But the practical part, the part that sounded like Grandma Rose's voice, recognized that a plea deal meant certainty, closure, no lengthy trial where I'd have to repeatedly relive the betrayal. I called Diane back. "What do you think?" "I think you've already won the important battles," she said. "You kept your house. You exposed his crimes. You protected other potential victims by ensuring his pattern is now documented. Whether he serves 5 years or 10 doesn't change those victories. A plea deal gets you to resolution faster, lets you move forward without years of trial proceedings hanging over you." "Then I agree to the plea deal," I said. "But I want to be at the sentencing hearing. I want to look him in the eye one more time and know he understands exactly what he lost." "I'll make sure you have the opportunity," Diane promised. "And Claire? You should be proud. You took a devastating situation and transformed it into justice. Not just for yourself, but for his previous victims and for anyone he might have targeted in the future." That matters. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and thought about transformation. How crisis could reveal character, how betrayal could clarify values, how the worst moments could become catalysts for growth. I'd entered this ordeal as someone who'd trusted too easily, who'd subordinated her own instincts to maintain a false peace, who'd been slowly losing herself in a marriage that demanded she become smaller. I was emerging as someone different. Stronger, yes, but also more discerning, more connected to community, more aware of what could be lost if not actively protected. The house hadn't just been saved. I had been saved, rescued from a relationship that would have eventually destroyed me as thoroughly as Marcus had planned to destroy this building. In Grandma Rose's bedroom, I pulled out her journal again and reread the final entry. Claire doesn't see what Marcus truly wants. He asks too many questions about property values, about what the lot might be worth if developed differently. I've tried to protect her through legal means, but she'll need to be strong when the real test comes. The real test had come. And I'd discovered strength I hadn't known I possessed, drawn from my grandmother's example and from the community she'd spent a lifetime building. The house would endure because women in my family understood that some things transcended market value, that home was worth fighting for, that legacy meant more than profit. Outside, the oak trees Grandma Rose had planted as saplings decades ago rustled in the evening breeze, their branches creating patterns of shadow and moonlight across the yard. They'd weathered storms and seasons, growing stronger each year, their roots deep in soil that held generations of history. Like those trees, I would weather this storm. Like those trees, I would grow stronger. Like those trees, I would stand. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a gray morning in late October, the kind of day where autumn's beauty had faded into winter's approach. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a navy suit that projected confidence without aggression, wanting to appear strong but not vindictive. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability and closure. Diane met me at the courthouse steps, carrying the briefcase that had become a symbol of our campaign for justice. Sarah Holloway and Jennifer Chen had both traveled to attend, united in their desire to see Marcus finally face consequences. We'd spoken several times over the past weeks, forming an unlikely support group of women who'd survived the same predator. "How are you feeling?" Jennifer asked as we waited in the corridor outside the courtroom. "Ready," I said simply. And I was. Ready to speak my truth, ready to watch Marcus answer for his crimes, ready to close this chapter and begin whatever came next. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected from television dramas, more bureaucratic than dramatic. Judge Margaret Hensley presided with an air of weary competence, someone who'd seen countless cases of human weakness and calculation. Marcus sat at the defense table beside his attorney, looking diminished somehow, his usual confidence replaced by the posture of someone who'd finally run out of schemes. He didn't look at me when I entered. Didn't acknowledge Sarah or Jennifer either. His attention stayed fixed on the table in front of him, on papers his attorney had spread out, on anything except the consequences of his actions made manifest in the form of 3 women he'd tried to destroy. The prosecutor presented the case methodically. Multiple counts of fraud across 3 victims spanning 7 years. Forged documents, false representation, systematic theft of assets through manipulation and deception. The pattern was irrefutable, documented through bank records and testimony and Marcus's own electronic communications that revealed calculated planning. This wasn't opportunistic crime, the prosecutor argued. This was professional predation. Marcus Holloway developed a sophisticated system for identifying vulnerable targets, gaining their trust through false courtship and positioning himself to steal inherited property. He refined his approach with each victim, learning from mistakes, improving his manipulation techniques. Without intervention, he would have continued this pattern indefinitely. Marcus's attorney, a tired-looking man who'd probably advised his client to accept the plea deal multiple times, offered a half-hearted defense. Difficult childhood, financial pressures, genuine affection for his wives that got complicated by poor decisions. The arguments rang hollow even to him, delivered with the mechanical obligation of someone fulfilling professional duty rather than believing his own words. Judge Hensley listened without visible reaction, making occasional notes, her expression revealing nothing. When both sides finished their presentations, she turned to the victims' impact statements. Sarah spoke first, her voice steady despite obvious emotion. She described the farm her family had worked for 4 generations, the legacy Marcus had tried to sell to developers who would have torn down her grandfather's barn and her great-grandmother's house to build an industrial park. She talked about the years of therapy needed to recover from the betrayal, the damaged ability to trust that had affected every relationship since. "I thought I'd found a partner," Sarah said. "Someone who understood rural life and appreciated the land's value beyond its price per acre. Instead, I'd invited a thief into my home, someone who saw my family's history as nothing more than an obstacle to his enrichment. The crime wasn't just financial. It was spiritual. He tried to erase my family's legacy for profit. That kind of violation doesn't heal quickly." Jennifer followed, describing the commercial building her father had built through decades of careful work, starting with a small restaurant and expanding into a mixed-use property that represented his life's achievement. Marcus had mortgaged it without her knowledge, pocketing the loan money while she remained responsible for payments she couldn't afford. "I lost the building," Jennifer said, her voice breaking slightly. "Had to sell it at a loss to avoid foreclosure. My father's legacy, gone because I trusted the wrong person. But worse than the financial loss was the damage to my sense of judgment. How do you trust yourself to make good decisions when you've been so thoroughly deceived? How do you open yourself to another relationship when your last one was built entirely on lies?" Marcus didn't just steal property. He stole my confidence in my own perceptions. Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium with notes I'd prepared but found I didn't need them. The words came directly from the experiences of the past months, from the clarity that had emerged through crisis. "Your Honor, Marcus Holloway targeted me at my most vulnerable moment. My grandmother had just passed away, and I was grieving the loss of the person who'd raised me, who'd been my anchor and my example. He presented himself as support, as companionship, as love. Instead, he was calculating how to steal the home she'd protected for 76 years. I described the elaborate scheme, the forged documents, the secret deals with developers, the systematic isolation from friends and community that had made me easier to manipulate. I talked about discovering his affair with Veronica Hansen, about learning he'd planned to abandon me after completing the theft, about the credit cards opened in my name and the debts I'd never incurred. But I want to tell you about something beyond the crimes charged here today," I continued. "I want to tell you about what Marcus tried to destroy and what he ultimately failed to take. My grandmother Rose was a pillar of her community. She fought commercial development twice in her lifetime, organizing neighbors and speaking at city council meetings and preserving the residential character of streets where families had lived for generations. She planted trees that now provide shade for children who weren't born when she dug the holes. She maintained a house that held memories spanning back to 1948, that represented continuity and stability in a world of constant change." I looked directly at Marcus for the first time. He was staring at his hands, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. Marcus saw all of that, everything my grandmother built and protected, and calculated its demolition value. He looked at 76 years of care and community and history, and he saw only profit. That reveals something about character that no amount of charm or manipulation can disguise. He's not just a criminal. He's someone fundamentally incapable of understanding what makes life meaningful beyond financial gain. I paused, gathering my thoughts for the conclusion I'd practiced, but that still felt emotionally raw. I'm not asking for excessive punishment. I'm asking for accountability that matches the crime. Marcus didn't just attempt to defraud 3 women. He attempted to erase legacies, to destroy communities, to reduce generations of meaning into transactions. He needs to face consequences serious enough that other predators might think twice. And he needs to understand that some things, once lost, can never be recovered. He's lost my trust, his freedom, his future. I've lost years and peace of mind and the marriage I thought I had. But I still have my home, my community, and my grandmother's example. Marcus has nothing left except the consequences of his own choices. The courtroom was silent when I returned to my seat. Diane squeezed my hand briefly, a gesture of support and approval. Across the aisle, I saw Marcus's shoulders shake slightly, though whether from genuine emotion or calculated performance, I couldn't tell and no longer cared. Judge Hensley reviewed her notes for what felt like an extended moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd heard countless excuses and recognized manipulation in all its forms. Mr. Holloway, I've presided over fraud cases for 18 years. I've seen crimes of desperation, crimes of addiction, crimes committed by people who made terrible choices during difficult circumstances. This isn't one of those cases. You committed crimes of cold calculation, targeting vulnerable women with systematic precision. The evidence shows planning, refinement of technique, complete lack of remorse until facing consequences. She detailed the plea agreement, the terms Marcus had accepted to avoid trial. Guilty plea to felony fraud. 5 years probation with the first 2 years served in minimum security facility. Full restitution to all 3 victims for documented financial losses. Permanent prohibition from working in real estate, financial services, or any field involving fiduciary responsibility. Mandatory counseling for personality disorders. Registration as a financial predator, a designation that would follow him for life and alert future potential victims. This sentence is designed not just to punish but to protect, Judge Hensley continued. To ensure you cannot easily victimize others, to create a public record that serves as warning, to impose consequences serious enough that the calculus of predation no longer favors the predator. You exploited trust, manipulated grief, and attempted to destroy legacies. Those crimes demand accountability beyond mere financial repayment. She addressed Marcus directly for the final time. You have the intelligence and capability to have built a legitimate life. Instead, you chose to parasitize others' achievements, to steal rather than earn, to destroy rather than create. That's a choice that reveals character more clearly than any amount of courtroom contrition can obscure. I hope these 2 years give you time to consider the person you've become and whether that's who you want to remain. But primarily, I hope this sentence protects future potential victims from the harm you've demonstrated yourself capable of inflicting. The gavel came down with finality. Marcus would be remanded into custody immediately, transported to begin serving his sentence. As officers approached to take him away, he finally looked at me, and in that moment I saw something I hadn't expected. Not remorse exactly, but recognition perhaps, an acknowledgement that he'd finally encountered someone who'd refused to be destroyed by his schemes. I held his gaze steadily, letting him see that I'd survived him, that the house still stood, that the community still thrived, that everything he'd tried to take remained protected. Then I looked away, dismissing him from my attention as thoroughly as he'd planned to dismiss me from his life. Outside the courthouse, unexpected sunshine broke through the morning's gray clouds. Sarah and Jennifer both hugged me, tears and relief mingling in the embrace of women who'd found solidarity through shared trauma. "Thank you for not giving up," Sarah said. "For building the case that finally stopped him. I've wondered for years if he was still out there doing this to other women. Now at least there's a record, a warning, protection." Jennifer added, "And thank you for showing us it was possible to fight back." I settled because I thought I had no choice. Watching you refuse to accept his version of reality, refuse to sign away your inheritance, it made me realize I'd given up too easily. I'm going back to court to reopen my case, to go after him for full restitution now that his pattern is established. We exchanged contact information, making plans to stay connected beyond the shared ordeal. What had started as separate victimizations had become a network of support, women who understood each other's experiences in ways no one else could. Diane drove me home, past familiar streets that looked somehow brighter in the afternoon light. When we pulled up to the house with Grandma Rose's sign mounted proudly beside the door, Walter was waiting on the front porch with Rita and several other neighbors. "Figured you might want company," Walter said simply. "We've got food inside, nothing fancy, just people who wanted to be here when you came home." The kitchen was filled with casseroles and baked goods and neighbors who'd become family. Tom and Linda Chen had brought Vietnamese spring rolls. Mrs. Bradford contributed her famous chocolate cake. Frank Morrison had made his specialty beef stew. The gathering wasn't a celebration exactly, more an acknowledgement of something completed, a chapter closed. "To justice," Rita said, raising a glass of sparkling cider. "And to Rose, who protected Claire even after she was gone." "To Rose," everyone echoed, glasses raised in tribute to the grandmother whose foresight and preparation had made this outcome possible. As the afternoon stretched into evening and neighbors gradually departed, Walter stayed behind to help clean up. We worked in comfortable silence, washing dishes and putting away leftover food, the familiar domestic tasks grounding after the intensity of the courthouse. "What happens now?" Walter asked, drying the last plate. "I don't know exactly," I admitted. "I need to rebuild my life. Figure out who I am outside of that marriage, outside of this crisis. Maybe travel some, visit places Grandma Rose always wanted to see but never got to. Maybe finally start that graphic design business I'd talked about before Marcus convinced me to work from home. Whatever you choose, you've got a neighborhood full of people ready to support you," Walter said. "That's Rose's real legacy. Not just the house, but the community she built around it." That night, alone in the house for the first time since the sentencing, I walked through each room saying a kind of goodbye to the crisis that had consumed the past months. The dining room where I'd spread out evidence. The attic where I'd found Grandma Rose's hidden lockbox. The kitchen where Walter and Diane and I had planned strategy. Each space held recent memories of struggle, but underneath were older memories of joy and safety and belonging. In my grandmother's bedroom, I sat at her secretary desk and pulled out fresh paper. Time to write my own letter, to document this experience while it was still vivid, to leave my own record for whatever came next. "Dear future self," I began. "You survived something that could have destroyed you. You discovered strength you didn't know you possessed. You learned that trust betrayed isn't a reflection of your foolishness but of someone else's calculated cruelty. You found that community matters more than you'd realized, that neighbors can become family, that isolation is often the first weapon of those who want to exploit you." I wrote about the lessons learned through crisis. The importance of documentation, of trusting your instincts, of asking questions even when answers might be uncomfortable. The value of legal protection and the wisdom of building networks that could support you during difficult times. The recognition that some people measured everything in transactions while others understood there were things beyond price. "You kept Grandma Rose's house," I continued. "But more importantly, you honored her example. You fought when fighting was necessary. You protected what mattered. You didn't let betrayal make you bitter or suspicious of everyone. You remained open to connection while being wiser about trust. That balance is what she would have wanted for you." The letter grew longer as I processed everything that had happened, transforming raw experience into narrative, finding meaning in the chaos. When I finally finished, I sealed it in an envelope and placed it in the secretary desk's hidden drawer, adding my story to my grandmother's documentation, creating a record for future generations who might face their own challenges. Sleep came easily that night, deep and dreamless, the sleep of someone who'd carried a heavy burden and finally set it down. When I woke the next morning, the house felt different somehow. Still familiar, still home, but also renewed with possibility rather than weighed down by crisis. My phone showed messages from Sarah and Jennifer, both checking in, making sure I was okay, sharing their own relief that the ordeal had concluded. There was an email from Detective Walsh confirming that Marcus had been processed into the correctional facility and that restitution payments would begin once his remaining assets were liquidated. Diane had sent a final accounting of legal fees, noting that many had been waived by professionals who'd wanted to help once they understood the case. But the message that surprised me most was from the Maplewood Historical Society, asking if I'd be willing to participate in an oral history project about the neighborhood's resistance to commercial development. They wanted to document Grandma Rose's activism and the recent successful opposition to Chambers Development's plans, creating a record that could guide future preservation efforts. "Your grandmother's work deserves to be remembered," the email concluded. "And your own contribution to protecting this community should be part of that record. Would you be willing to be interviewed for our archives?" I responded affirmatively, seeing it as another way to honor Grandma Rose's legacy while ensuring that the lessons learned weren't lost. The personal had always been political for her, the individual fight connected to larger questions about community values and the kind of world we wanted to create. Over the following weeks, life gradually returned to a new kind of normal. I reopened my graphic design business, reaching out to old clients and discovering that many had continued to follow my work online. The flexibility of freelancing allowed me to set my own schedule, to work from Grandma Rose's sunlit studio room, to build a career on my own terms rather than fitting into structures someone else had designed. The divorce was finalized with minimal drama, Marcus having no grounds to contest anything and no desire to drag out proceedings that only highlighted his crimes. The house remained solely in my name, protected by my grandmother's careful legal structuring. The fraudulent debts were resolved, removed from my credit report with documentation of identity theft. Slowly, systematically, the financial damage Marcus had inflicted was being repaired. The neighborhood association thrived under Rita's leadership, meeting monthly to discuss preservation strategies and community building. We organized seasonal events that brought residents together, street festivals and holiday celebrations that strengthened connections between neighbors. Frank Morrison taught classes on local history, sharing stories of the area's development and the various times residents had successfully opposed threats to their way of life. Walter and I continued our morning coffee routine in his workshop, though now the conversation ranged beyond crisis management to encompass ordinary life. He taught me proper furniture restoration techniques, passing on skills he'd refined over decades. I helped him digitize his extensive collection of neighborhood photographs, creating an archive that documented Riverside Drive's evolution across 40 years. On Thanksgiving, nearly a year after the crisis began, I hosted dinner at Grandma Rose's house. The table that had once accommodated only Marcus and me now stretched to include Walter, Rita, Tom and Linda Chin, Mrs. Bradford, Frank Morrison, and several other neighbors who'd become close friends. We shared food and stories in gratitude for community that had proven stronger than schemes designed to destroy it. During the meal, Rita proposed a toast. To Claire, for showing us what courage looks like. And to Rose, who taught her well. To Claire and Rose, the table echoed, glasses raised in acknowledgement of continuity across generations. Later, as I cleaned up with help from various guests, I found myself at the kitchen window looking out at the oak trees Grandma Rose had planted. They stood strong against the winter sky, their bare branches creating intricate patterns, their roots deep in soil that held decades of history. In spring they would leaf out again, beginning another cycle of growth and renewal, unchanged in their essential nature despite seasons of change. That's what this house represented, I realized. Continuity through change. Strength to weather storms. Roots deep enough to hold firm when forces tried to uproot and destroy. Grandma Rose had understood that, had built both physical and social structures to ensure preservation. Now I was continuing that work, adapting her example to new challenges while maintaining the core values she'd embodied. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Chin. She'd reopened her case against Marcus and had won a judgment for full restitution plus damages. Sarah had successfully sued for emotional distress and received a settlement that would fund her farm's expansion. Marcus's crimes were generating consequences that extended beyond his prison sentence, ensuring he'd spend years paying back what he'd stolen. As the last guests departed and I locked up the house for the night, I paused at the front door where the sign reading, "The Rose Donovan House," caught the porch light. My grandmother's name would endure on this building long after both of us were gone, a testament to a life lived in service of values beyond profit, a reminder that some things were worth protecting regardless of cost. Inside, the house settled around me with its familiar sounds, the creaks and sighs that had been the soundtrack of my childhood and that would continue long into the future. This building had weathered attempts at theft and destruction. It had survived scheming and betrayal. And it would continue to stand, sheltering future generations who understood that home meant more than property value, that community mattered more than individual enrichment, that legacy was built through protection of what mattered most. I'd entered this crisis as someone who'd lost her way, who'd been slowly diminishing under the weight of a fraudulent marriage. I emerged as someone who'd rediscovered her strength, who'd learned to trust her instincts, who'd found that the support of community could help you survive what seemed insurmountable when faced alone. Marcus had wanted to sell our home urgently, to cash out my inheritance and move on to his next scheme. Instead, his urgency had been his undoing, forcing him to move too quickly, to make mistakes that revealed his true nature, to create the very circumstances that led to his capture and conviction. The house remained. The community thrived. And I stood at the beginning of whatever came next, rooted in the example my grandmother had left, supported by the network she'd built, protected by the legal structures she'd created, and empowered by the strength I'd discovered through surviving what should have destroyed me. Some fights were worth having, no matter how much they cost. Some legacies were worth protecting, regardless of pressure to abandon them. Some truths were worth defending, even when lies were more convenient. Grandma Rose had taught me that through her example and her foresight. Now I would teach it to others through my own story, through my willingness to fight for what mattered, through my refusal to let betrayal define or destroy me. The house stood. I stood with it. And together, we would continue standing for as long as strength and stubbornness and community support could sustain us. That was the real victory, not the legal outcomes or the financial recoveries, but the simple enduring fact of survival, of refusing to be erased, of protecting what previous generations had built so future generations might inherit it intact. Outside, the wind moved through the oak trees, rustling branches in the darkness. Inside, warmth and light and the accumulated meaning of decades filled rooms that held more than furniture and memories. They held proof that some things transcended market value, that home was worth fighting for, and that women in my family didn't surrender what mattered without first exhausting every option for its protection. I'd learned that lesson well. And I'd pass it forward, just as Grandma Rose had passed it to me, an inheritance more valuable than property, more enduring than buildings, more essential than anything that could be measured in dollars or calculated in square footage. The house was safe. The community was strong. And I was finally, fully, myself again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.